The Science of Brain Fog and Lost Words. You're mid-sentence. Confident, articulate, you know exactly what you want to say. And then, nothing. The word is just gone. Not forgotten, not gone forever, just completely, infuriatingly out of reach. So you trail off, replace it with something simpler, or you laugh it off. But inside, there's this quiet unease. Why does this keep happening? Here's what most people assume. Stress, maybe, getting older, not sleeping enough. And while those things matter, they're missing the real mechanism, the one that's actually making your thoughts feel like they're moving through wet concrete. In this episode, you'll understand exactly what's driving that heavy, foggy wall and what to actually do about it. You're listening to Your Space Today, the podcast where we decode fatigue, stress, and burnout so you can rise again. Every Tuesday, we explore the hidden connections between your habits, your health, and your happiness, giving you the tools to take back your energy and your life. Let me tell you about Miriam. She's a project manager at a mid-size architecture firm, 37 years old, 2 kids, looks completely fine from the outside. Organized, capable, the person colleagues come to when something needs to get done properly. Every morning, she sits down at her desk with her coffee and her to-do list, and by 11, she's already reread the same email 3 times without absorbing a word. She's not overwhelmed, not in the way she can point to anyway. She just feels sluggish, like her brain is slightly behind everything, struggling to catch up. And somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, she hits a wall so thick that even writing a simple message feels like a genuine effort. Miriam isn't exhausted. She's slept 7 hours. She's eaten reasonably well. She exercises on weekends. By every external measure, she's doing everything right. But her brain isn't cooperating. And here's the part that worries her most: the words. She'll be speaking in a meeting, mid-thought, and the word just vanishes. Not a complicated word. Sometimes it's embarrassingly ordinary. She knows it. She can almost feel it sitting just behind her tongue. But it won't come. So she pivots, finds a workaround, moves on. And then spends the next 10 minutes quietly wondering, is something wrong with me? If you felt that, even occasionally, you already know how unsettling it is. Not because forgetting a word is catastrophic, but because of what it implies, the fear underneath it. Am I losing it? Is this what decline feels like? Why can't I think the way I used to? Here's what I want you to sit with before we go any further. What Miriam is experiencing isn't cognitive decline. It isn't a personality flaw or a lack of focus. It's her brain signaling that it's operating under conditions it wasn't designed to sustain. And that signal has a very specific mechanism behind it. In a few minutes, I'll walk you through what's actually happening in the brain when this occurs, and why the timing of it, that afternoon crash in particular, is far from random. But first, the pattern. Because this kind of foggy, word-slipping slowness doesn't show up randomly. It tends to cluster. Early afternoons, usually between 1 and 4, after periods of sustained stress, during or after burnout phases, when sleep has been fragmented or irregular. Most people notice the pattern but don't connect the dots. They think, I need more caffeine. I need to focus harder. I need more willpower. None of those are wrong exactly, but they're treating the symptom, not what's actually driving it. And here's where this gets really interesting, because what's driving it starts much earlier than 2 p.m. There's a concept in neuroscience called neuroinflammation. It sounds clinical and slightly alarming, but the reality of it is actually very intuitive once you understand what it means. Here's the short version. When you're under sustained stress, not just the dramatic kind, but the low-grade background hum of too much to do, too many decisions, too little real rest, your immune system doesn't stay neutral. It responds. And part of that response involves releasing signaling molecules. These are essentially the immune system's communication network. The problem is that some of those signals reach the brain. Researchers who've spent years studying this connection found something that genuinely reframes how we think about mental fatigue. It turns out the same inflammatory process your body uses to respond to infection or injury, the one that makes you feel slow, foggy, unmotivated, flat, can be triggered by chronic psychological stress too, not just physical illness. Think of it like static in the signal. Your brain is constantly transmitting and receiving, neurons firing, pathways activating, information moving between networks. Neuroinflammation doesn't erase those signals, it degrades them, slows them down, makes retrieval, pulling a specific word from a specific memory network, slower and less reliable. That's what's happening when the word disappears mid-sentence. The pathway is there, the word is there, but the signal is fighting its way through interference. Now add to that what chronic stress does to one specific part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is the area right behind your forehead, the seat of clear thinking, decision-making, flexible reasoning. Neuroscientists at Yale spent years mapping exactly what happens to it under stress. What they found is this. When the stress response stays activated for extended periods, the brain begins redirecting resources. Energy gets pulled towards survival-oriented systems, the reactive, fast, threat detection parts. And the prefrontal cortex, which requires a disproportionately large share of your body's energy to run well, starts operating on reduced fuel. This is why Miriam manages fine in reactive mode, answering, responding, putting out fires. But the moment she needs to think with any real precision, that's prefrontal territory, and hers is running low. Your brain accounts for around 20% of your entire body's energy consumption, from an organ that makes up roughly 2% of your body weight. When that energy delivery becomes unstable, the prefrontal cortex is one of the first places you feel it. Which is why you can scroll through your phone for an hour with zero friction, but sit down to write one thoughtful email and it feels like pushing through fog. There's one more layer here, and it matters more than people realize. Sleep isn't just rest, it's a biological maintenance window. The brain has its own overnight waste clearance system, one that only fully activates during deep, uninterrupted sleep. Research showed that this is when the metabolic byproducts from a full day of neural activity actually get flushed out. Skip that window, fragment it, or cut it short, and those byproducts accumulate. You wake up and the system is already starting behind. We've explored the glymphatic system, sleep inertia, and how blood sugar fluctuations affect overnight recovery in dedicated episodes. You'll find links to both in the description. They add important context to everything we're covering today. If you haven't heard them yet, they're worth going back to. And here's what catches most people off guard in the meantime. 7 or 8 hours in bed isn't the same as 7 or 8 hours of restorative sleep. If those hours are fragmented, and for anyone running on chronic stress, they often are, the clearance is incomplete. If your brain feels slow and foggy in the morning, or hits that wall at 2 p.m., there's a strong chance the problem began before you even sat down at your desk. But this leads to an uncomfortable realization. If all of this is driven by inflammation, energy instability, and fragmented sleep, then most of the advice we give ourselves when we feel foggy is actually making it worse. Here's where most people get stuck. They notice the fog. They try to push through it. They add more caffeine, more pressure, more self-criticism. And when none of that works, they begin to internalize the story. I've lost my edge. I can't focus like I used to. Miriam does this. She catches herself being slower than she'd like, and her response, almost automatically, is to try harder, to treat it as a willpower problem. But brain fog isn't a willpower problem. It's a systems problem. What her brain is actually doing is running a form of energy conservation. When the system is overloaded, when inflammation is elevated, when glucose delivery is unstable, when sleep hasn't delivered a proper reset, the brain doesn't simply underperform, it strategically reduces output. It narrows the bandwidth. This is a protective response, and fighting it with more pressure is a bit like flooring the accelerator when the fuel light is on. The research on stress and the prefrontal cortex makes this very clear. The brain doesn't distinguish between one large demand and 100 small ones. A sustained low-grade load, constant switching, constant monitoring, never fully off, creates the same kind of prefrontal depletion as a single acute stressor. Just more slowly, and without the obvious trigger you can point to. And the reason this matters is that it's never just one thing. What you eat determines how stable your brain's energy supply is, and without that stability, the prefrontal cortex simply doesn't have what it needs to function clearly. How much your body moves affects blood flow to the brain and how well your nervous system recovers from stress. And most of us are moving far less than our biology expects. The mental patterns running quietly in the background, the rumination, the self-monitoring, the low-level performance anxiety, carry a real physiological cost that compounds over time. And underneath all of it, the rhythm of your days, your sleep quality, your digital habits, the absence of genuine rest. This is often where the whole system begins to tip. These 4 areas, what you eat, how you move, how you think, and how your days are structured, don't operate in isolation. When one weakens, the others compensate, until eventually the whole system tips. But the reverse is also true. Strengthen one, and the others tend to follow. If you want to go deeper on how these connections play out, there's a written piece on our website that goes further than we can here in the podcast. It explores each of these 4 areas in more detail, with the fuller context they deserve. You'll find the link below. So in a moment, I'll show you what actually helps. And it's a small number of specific, high-leverage shifts rather than a long list of overhauls. The real question becomes, how do we actually work with the brain, rather than demand more from it than it can currently give? Let's talk about it step by step. The goal here isn't to eliminate brain fog overnight. It's to reduce the load that's producing it and give your brain the conditions it needs to gradually recover its capacity. There are 3 things worth doing consistently, and one optional step for when you're ready to go a little further. The 10-minute walk. When your nervous system has been running in low-grade threat mode all morning, the prefrontal cortex stays suppressed. A short walk outside is one of the most direct ways to shift that. Gentle movement brings stress hormone levels down and begins nudging the nervous system out of its reactive state. Add natural daylight, particularly in the afternoon, and you're giving your circadian system a stabilizing signal that directly supports alertness and mood. Movement also increases blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. Research into physical activity and cognitive function shows that even low-intensity movement meaningfully supports the brain's ability to function clearly in the short term. You don't need intensity. You need to move, get outside, and breathe. 10 minutes, that's it. And when the 2 p.m. wall hits, this is your first move. Stable energy, starting with breakfast. What you eat in the morning determines how your brain performs by midday. A protein and fat-based breakfast, rather than something carbohydrate-heavy, creates a stable energy curve instead of a spike and crash. Researchers studying glucose and cognitive function found that even mild blood sugar instability measurably impairs memory retrieval and processing speed, not in people with metabolic conditions, but in ordinary adults eating ordinary modern diets. That afternoon wall is often not a focus problem. It's a fuel problem that started at breakfast. Hydration, before the coffee. This is the one people dismiss most readily. Research on mild dehydration, not serious dehydration, just the subtle kind that sets in when your first drink of the day is coffee, found it impairs cognitive performance and mood in ways that are consistently measurable. 1 glass of water before your morning coffee. Small input, real upstream effect on how clearly you think 4 hours later. These 3 things, the walk, stable fuel, and hydration, work together to reduce how hard that 2 p.m. wall hits in the first place. When you feel it coming anyway, the walk is still your best immediate reset. Step outside, 5 to 10 minutes, let your nervous system shift and your brain get some oxygen. Then come back and start with one simple task, not your hardest work. Let the prefrontal cortex re-engage on its own terms before you ask anything demanding of it. One optional step further. When you're ready, not urgently, but when you are, there is solid evidence that regular, moderate exercise, done consistently over time, helps the body manage low-grade inflammation more effectively at a deeper level. Research reviewing the effects of physical activity on brain health found this is one of the most reliable levers we have for reducing the chronic inflammatory load underlying so much of what we have described today. It doesn't have to be much. An interval walk twice a week is enough to begin. Walk at your normal pace for a couple of minutes, then pick up the pace for 2 minutes. Brisk enough that your heart rate rises, but still comfortable enough to hold a conversation. Then ease back. Then repeat. No gym, no program. Just enough of a stimulus to begin shifting the biological baseline over time. Just a gentle signal to your system. As that signal compounds, your baseline shifts. What once felt demanding becomes familiar, even easy. And from that new place, you'll naturally find space for more. The next step won't feel like a burden, but like the obvious continuation. And for the lost words, this one is counterintuitive. When a word disappears mid-sentence, the instinct is to concentrate harder. But that effort increases pressure on the very system that's already struggling. What works better? Pause. Shift your attention briefly, even just for a few seconds, and let the word come back on its own. The brain's passive retrieval systems are actually very good at this. They just need you to stop demanding. The underlying shift across all of this is the same. Stop treating your brain as a machine that can be pushed harder when it underperforms. Start treating it as a biological system that recovers when you give it the right conditions. Miriam didn't need to overhaul her life. She needed to understand what was actually happening and make a few small changes that gave her brain the environment it was asking for. If you recognize Miriam in yourself, the capable person who keeps bumping into this invisible wall, that's exactly where to start. Here's what we covered today. Brain fog and lost words aren't random, and they're not a sign of decline. They're the result of specific, measurable biological conditions: neuroinflammation slowing neural transmission, a depleted prefrontal cortex struggling to retrieve language, unstable energy delivery, and incomplete overnight clearance. Real mechanisms. And they respond to real interventions. The clearest place to begin: get outside for 10 minutes, eat something that keeps your energy stable, and give yourself a genuine moment of recovery when the afternoon wall hits, instead of another push through it. Small inputs, aimed at the right places. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you want to understand what happens when it's not just your mind that feels stuck, but your whole body that refuses to cooperate, I break that down in the next episode. Until then, take care of yourself. You deserve it. Your Space Today is published every Tuesday at 6 p.m. For detailed information, disclaimers, scientific references, visit the links below this podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider regarding any health concerns.